What if you had a monopoly on people's access to information, and without them even knowing about it, just when they happen to open up their phone or their laptop in the morning, you were able to direct them to your candidate without anybody knowing it? Google is already more powerful in terms of its control over people's lives than almost every government on the planet. And I would say, arguably, it has more control over American lives than, say, the government of Russia does, as a practical matter.
Social scientist Robert Epstein has pointed out that Google alone could determine the outcome of almost any American election just by altering its search suggestions.
People are very naive about Google searches. They think that it doesn't, whether you're in a hotel in Des Moines or whether you're hanging upside down in your bondage dungeon in Poughkeepsie, when you enter the search results, everything's the same.
You know, when a mom does a search for a pediatrician in Salt Lake City, she is basically trusting Google to match her with the best information from across the web. That has been the implicit promise to Google's users throughout its growth. But what's happened is that Google has swapped out that information and put their own inferior information there. And so this creates consumer harm.
They're actually capable of now targeting election content specifically to certain voting groups. So this isn't like, you know, rock the vote or public attempts to get out the vote. This is where the world's most powerful company is using data mining to channel partisan election information to key voting demographics. That's very disturbing, because they'd steal the election and you'd never know it.
We'd never know what happened. Oh, say tech defenders, don't worry. These are businesses. They exist to make money, not to push political agendas. Well, it turns out that's not true, and we can prove it. An email obtained exclusively by this show reveals that a senior Google employee deployed the company's resources to increase voter turnout in ways she believed would help the Clinton campaign win in the last election. The email we obtained came from a woman named Eliana Murillo, the former head of Google's multicultural marketing department. She sent the email on November 9th, 2016. That was one day after the presidential election. That email was subsequently forwarded by 2 Google vice presidents to more staff members throughout the company. In her email, Murillo touts Google's multifaceted efforts to boost Hispanic turnout in the election. She notes that Latinos voted in record-breaking numbers, especially in states like Florida, Nevada, and Arizona, the last of which she describes as, quote, a key state for us. She brags that the company used its power to ensure that millions of people saw certain hashtags and social media impressions with the goal of influencing their behavior during the election. Elsewhere in the email, Murillo says Google, quote, supported partners like Voto Latino to pay for rides to the polls in key states. She describes this assistance as, quote, a silent donation. Murillo then says that Google helped Voto Latino create ad campaigns to promote those rides. Now, officially, Voto Latino is a nonpartisan entity, but that is a sham. Voto Latino is vocally partisan. Recently, the group declared that Hispanics, all Hispanics, are in President Trump's, quote, crosshairs. They said they plan to respond to this by registering another 1 million additional Hispanic voters in the next presidential cycle. Voto Latino is a group with clear political goals, goals that Google supported in 2016. I don't think I've ever heard a single liberal say anything about Google's effect on elections, subverting our democracy. No. Why is that?
Well, because I think for the obvious reason that they're doing it for, as Eliana Murillo would say, for our side, for our team, for the left's team.
It was, in effect, an in-kind contribution to the Hillary Clinton for President campaign. In the end, Google was disappointed. As Murillo herself conceded, quote, ultimately, after all was said and done, the Latino community did come out to vote and completely surprised us. We never anticipated that 29% of Latinos would vote for Trump. No one did. If you see a Latino Googler in the office, please give them a smile. They are probably hurting right now. You can rest assured that the Latinos of these blue states need your thoughts and prayers for them and their families. I had planned a vacation and thought I would be taking the time to celebrate. Now it will be time to reflect on how to continue to support my community through these difficult times. Google tried to get Hillary elected. They failed this time. We reached out to Google. The company did not deny that the email was real or that it showed a clear political preference. Their only defense was that the activities it described were either nonpartisan or weren't taken officially by the company. But of course, they were both. Plenty of people in Google knew what was going on, and we've seen no evidence that anyone at Google disapproved of it or tried to rein it in. 2 years later, Google is more powerful than it's ever been, and the left has increasingly become radical in what it is willing to do to regain political power.
Days after the election, Google's top executives, including co-founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page, delivered an incredible rant about how upset they were at Donald Trump's victory and how extreme his voters are. All this was recorded, and this week the video was leaked to Breitbart.
Most people here are pretty upset and pretty sad. Myself, as an immigrant and a refugee, I certainly find this election deeply offensive, and I know many of you do too. And I think it's a very stressful time, and it conflicts with many of our values.
Fear, I think, not just in the United States, but around the world, is what's fueling concerns, xenophobia, hatred, and a desire for answers that may or may not be there.
What's amazing here is that the Google leaders are doing this all in front of video cameras. Like the video is rolling, and they assume that absolutely everybody agrees with them that Trump's election was a no-good, horrible, terrible, depressing event. There's even talk of helping employees move to Canada.
It was a really simple question. Google has a monopoly. Nobody debates that. Monopolies are supposed to be banned by U.S. law.
It's their dominance that makes them dangerous. No one in our society should be overmighty. Not the government, not the unions, not big business, and certainly not big tech.
We have a whole Congress with 535 people in it designed to protect us from monopolies, but they're not. Why?
Well, I think there's political capture going on, and I think if you have a search engine that is clearly guilty of self-serving bias, and I'm not talking about the type of self-serving bias that President Trump tweeted about earlier this week. I'm talking about demonstrable, easy-to-prove bias in the most common area of what we do on Google, which is local search. This should be a slam dunk. We should be able to show consumer harm, and in fact, we have done so.
The most dangerous thing going on with big tech right now is Google's collusion with our number one enemy, China, to develop a search engine that implements the regime's censorship of information it doesn't like. This is part of Google's plan to get back into China after it pulled out in 2010 in protest at the Chinese government's hacking of Gmail.
It's a search engine that they would censor. They would help facilitate the government in its ability to keep the Chinese citizenry ignorant. But it's more than that. They're also talking about using Chinese companies, which are, of course, the government companies, to manage the cloud that would be in China that Google would use, which means all the documents that would be moved through the Google cloud for China would be available to the Chinese government.
Google has built an artificial intelligence center in Beijing, even though the Chinese regime is openly saying it will use artificial intelligence to achieve military and economic dominance over America.
Google had a contract with the Pentagon. Facing what they thought would be an insurrection from their employees, they dumped the contract because some people believed that they'd be working with some weaponry that would eventually work to kill people, so they didn't want to be part of it. So you say goodbye, red, white, and blue, and then you go into China and say, what will it take for us to get this business?
It's the essence of globalism that businesses have no loyalty to their home country.
Google is not an American company. It's a multinational. This is a foreign threat to our country.
For more than most corporations, America really is Google's home. Did you know that Google got started thanks to a program run by the US government? Google wouldn't exist if it wasn't for American taxpayers. Google once said its mission was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. Its motto was, "Don't be evil." But now they floated off in a giant balloon of arrogance, untethered to any notions of loyalty or ethics.
What could Google be doing this election cycle to support its preferred candidates? What could they do in 2020? It is a question almost nobody in Washington seems interested in even asking. They ought to be interested.